Okay, we are live.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I am calling together the members of the Economic Development Retail Sales Tax Board, EDRST, for an emergency meeting. Cliff is going to call the roll. Cliff
Yeah.
Cross.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Bellows. Leonard.
Here. Bellows
Yes.
here.
Bellows is
Here.
here too. Okay. Kuhlman. Sorkin.
Here.
Erker. O'Brien.
Here.
Williams. Price.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
We have a quorum. And Mayor Crow as well, correct? You're present?
Correct.
We have a
Welcome.
quorum.
Well, first, let me just thank everybody. We first got the call about this on Thursday, and to pull together a quorum this quickly, I really appreciate everybody's efforts. And we certainly want to assist the city in moving forward with anything we can do to alleviate the distress that our businesses are going through due to the COVID crisis. Before we get into the meatier subjects, could I entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the October 15th meeting, which were sent out with this board packet, please?
I move to approve the minutes.
Thank
I'll
you.
second that.
Thank you, Brendan. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, the ayes have it.
I'm abstaining. I wasn't there.
Okay. With respect to public comments, obviously we're not able to have people walk up to our table and speak tonight, but we did receive a number of letters that went through Cliff Cross's office, and those were sent out to all of us. I would imagine most of us, if not all of us, have read all those letters. I certainly have. So with that, I'd like to turn to the city manager, Gregory Rose, to introductory remarks about the.
Madam Chair, thank you. I think by now all of you have at least met, if not in person, virtually, Clifford Cross, who is now taking over economic development for us. I would like to state that the council is very eager to receive your recommendation regarding a proposed project that could assist all of our businesses within the city. We certainly are sensitive and to the environment that we're in, especially with the COVID-19 and the financial impacts that is creating. But I would also share that as we move forward, we're trying to ensure that we do a good job with balancing, doing something in an expeditious way, but also doing it in the right way, and making sure that whatever program is ultimately approved by the mayor and council is consistent with the codes and state statutes that govern it. But I will defer to the mayor if he had any comments to make from the council's perspective.
Well, I'll be very brief. I think that the situation definitely calls for us to be of assistance to our business community. And those of you who are on this call on the EDRST board, we have the great benefit of having this fund available and having your input so that we can make these funds available to our businesses relatively quickly. We do realize that the amounts of money that we are talking about tonight, when spread over a number of businesses, may not be large, but we also believe it may be a lifeline for a number of our businesses. We also believe that this is one of those times when you are sitting on reserves, that it is a good time to put that money to work, particularly since the people who will be receiving the funds are in essence many of the folks who paid for these funds. So to me, this is one of those opportunities for us to do the best that we can. I think we all recognize, for those of us who have already participated in the PPP program on the federal level, that it has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. And moving this quickly, I think we recognize that oversight is a concern. At the same point in time, we realize that we're moving quickly, and therefore there's probably a little bit of how fast we can get the money to businesses, because I think we recognize the timing. So with that, I will turn it over to whomever is next. Chair.
Yes, sir. So next on the agenda, before we launch into that, is I do need to ask if there's any old business that needs to be discussed. I didn't think so. All right, let's move forward on discussion of these recommendations. I think to handle this properly, there ought to be a motion that we can then discuss. So if anyone care to make a motion at this point to adopt the recommendations of the University City staff, I'll entertain that motion, and then we can have discussion and questions and answers. And I know there are a lot of questions.
Point of clarification, is it a motion to discuss versus a motion to adopt?
No, it would be a motion to adopt.
What I'd be happy to do, if you want, Madam Chairman, is to run through a real brief summary of kind of how we got where we're at. So I think everybody understands a little bit of the logic on how we do it. And you know, that what we've presented is our best guess at a draft to get things started. So you know, we're not saying it's going to be the final product, because we know dates could change. And I know there's been some concerns. Are we moving too fast? Are we moving too slow? Are the timelines appropriate to make applications? So basically, just a quick summary of it is roughly there was $2.5 million in the EDRST reserves or fund. So we had to take out roughly 700 and some thousand for projects that were already committed to Mark. We also had to remove an approximate $510,000 for eligible projects that are classified as long-term economic development projects in 120-520 subsection B of our code. And then it was also further considered that in addition to that, we needed to really keep some reserve money in place and not completely deplete what's there. That resulted in roughly another $325,000. So where all that takes us is right at just over $1 million that we have available for the project. And I think our initial proposal was to bring two different rounds to you that run very close together. And the logic behind that was the first round really is pretty simple. When individuals are making applications for state and federal programs, it's a much more cumbersome process, and they have more staff that can better monitor and audit it, so to speak. So the first round basically is tailored around those that are already eligible for PPP grants and loans and things like that. The second round follows up for those businesses that are in the same situation, but we're not eligible for the PPP. So it really removes some of the strings and the red tape with the intent of reducing our demand staff, because we're very, very limited. So that was the logic behind doing the two rounds there. The funding for individual based businesses, and this really goes to what the mayor said, what we really are proposing, what you put in is what you're eligible to get out. So if you paid $7,500 last year in your EDRST fees, you're eligible for up to $7,500 as part of this forgivable loan program. And really, to be forgivable, you really just have to meet the program guidelines, which are pretty minimal for each of them for each round. And if you do meet those guidelines, then the loan is forgiven. If not, then you have to pay it back with a 5% interest within 2 years. So that's really how we got here, unless Mr. Rose or Mr. Mulligan has anything else in terms of, because I know John worked on this quite a bit with Libby. That's really a summary of how we got to where we are.
I would just clarify that for the second round as well, we want to make sure that those businesses that may not have the same level of financial wherewithal or sophistication as it relates to being able to apply for the PPP program or federal, or I'm sorry, or state or SBA loans, that we create a situation so that the program is equitable for those businesses. So that was one of the reasons that we are recommending the 2 rounds, one with more stringent criteria, but also with a criteria that's already in place that we can easily replicate and that can be easily administered. And then figuring out a second round, how do we create an equitable program for those businesses? They may have been able to qualify, but simply did not have the sophistication to place the applications.
With respect to how we got to where we are today, I could back up to last month. We received a letter from the Loop Special Business District requesting that approximately 20% of available EDRST reserves be provided to Loop businesses as a form of COVID-19 emergency relief. If, for instance, if we had $1 million available, the Loop Special Business District proposal adopted at its meeting on March 24th was that be made available in the form of relief, and that allocation be based on the amount of business license fee that each business in the Loop paid during the preceding year. That was received by city manager and staff. We reviewed it, and staff and the city manager and thought that and believed that this should be a citywide program as opposed to just limited to the Del Mar Loop. And looking at some of the numbers, Libby and I and Keith and as well as city manager, and then Cliff very recently spent a fair amount of time looking at what this would mean in terms of dollars and cents for various businesses, and analyzed different ways that we could structure this, but that this would be done on a citywide basis. So I know the board is typically used to dealing with projects. That is, a business comes before the board and says, here's my economic development project, and then that competes with the other ones. You all vote and then make recommendations to the council. This one's a little bit different. This one is coming from the LSBD, but not packaged as a proposal to you, but it was made in the form of a request for emergency relief from the city, which technically could be under the EDRST umbrella, or could be just a general fund type of public purpose disaster relief. But I think the way it was presented was that the LSBD thought that the EDRST funding would be the best way to go with this. So this is coming then from the LSBD as modified by staff for your consideration.
Thank you. Questions from the members?
Should we be asking the questions about the specific proposal yet, or are we going to wait until we do a motion?
I think we want to move forward with a recommendation if we can get to that point. So yeah, obviously questions, concerns, and how we would ultimately tailor the final guidelines, so to speak. Yeah, I think it's appropriate to discuss that and get that in place now.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. How are we planning to market this to the businesses so that all of the businesses are being made known that this money is available, especially since some of those businesses may not actually physically have people in their shops right now?
Correct.
You know, are we mailing it? Are we making sure that how is that going to happen?
Well, I actually, now that I've taken this position here, I have a staff member that I have assisting me 100% on this. So she is currently gathering all the best contact information that Libby had and from other sources. We plan on putting this out in a blast. We'll personally reach out to businesses with best contact numbers, and a mailing is an option. Obviously, we want to get it out ASAP because we want as fast a response as we can. So we have multiple options that we're going to focus on. Also put out in an e-blast, that sort of thing.
Okay.
A press conference, would this be announced in any way in the media?
I would say that's going to be up to the mayor and council as far as how they want to make the public aware and make the businesses aware of the existence of the program once it's been approved.
Terry, Mr. Mayor, you're on mute.
I would like to get this, thank you, Tracy. I'd like to get this out as quickly as possible to everyone if a press conference is fine. My biggest concern is in the past when we have done this, when we did it in the Loop several years ago, the response rate was not very high. So the goal here would be for us to get the information out as broadly as possible. And I think that my guess is that once we pop this out on the Facebook page and eBlast, we're going to probably get several other groups to probably help us get the information out. I do want to follow up a little bit with Tracy and just throw this out there, not trying to create more work for anyone, but are we doing this? Are we doing this in any of the other? Are we making any translations available for either Spanish or for Chinese?
That's certainly an option that that we can do, is to make it available in Mandarin and Spanish. So,
Yeah, we kind of got that pushback at Olive in 170, and I kind of like to have us learn from the lessons of the past, and at least make it available in some form or fashion. It is kind of hard though, because we had someone tell us that we ought to be going to all the businesses and knocking on their doors, but unless I'm missing it, 90% of the businesses aren't going to answer their doors. And so communication plan here is actually very critical to get this information out to everyone.
I would think that email, social media, and phone calls, literally, if possible, would be our best bet. And I think that the idea of translating, at least in Chinese and Spanish, would be, appropriate for our businesses in U City.
And one new help that we got, and I know Mr. Rose can speak of this, is Jessica is working with us now to help us better get the word out to our businesses with Fusion Media Concepts. So I think that's going to play a significant role in helping us better understand how to market our programs. So I think that's going to carry a lot of weight as well in getting the word out.
I'd like to just ask a question about that, or just kind of make a point. I know that Jessica with Fusion Media is a Loop business and has owned Loop business before. So I just want to make sure that the businesses that are marketed to are all through UCity and not just in the Loop. I think that a lot of the businesses that are along the Olive Corridor and even along Del Mar could, be missed if we focus too much on the Loop.
No.
Vernon, there's folks all over. So you're right, Tracy. I agree.
What I can tell you is she's provided staff. I've seen a detailed breakdown of businesses, and she's got them separated in the Loop, along Olive, other parts of the city at North and South. So she showed a very diverse contact list of businesses that everything will go out to in one blast.
And Kathy, I think that you're not on video as I understand. So I know I've done this at city council meetings, so I'm just going to kind of pay attention. I think Brendan wants to speak and he's been raising his hand a little bit.
I
So
can't see that. I'm sorry, Brenda.
Oh, that's
Okay.
all right.
Brent
Just a
wants
quick
to
question.
speak, and then George.
Perfect. I know we want to get this done quickly. Is the idea, Cliff,
I think
that you guys will score it? You guys will score it just like the projects and then kind of turn it around? Or how do you, it says you're going to evaluate it for compliance, funding priorities. What's that mean?
Well, it's going to be intended to be an administratively administered program where we would not bring them back before you. I've seen other communities that basically do individual deadlines at the end of a week and then take a stack of them to it. But it's pretty much going to be funding available. If the funding is available throughout and they meet those program eligibility guidelines, they're going to get it approved administratively, how we're going to approach it to make sure we can get quick turnaround.
Okay. Would they be queued up then if once the first round's done to immediately go into the second?
Well, that's a question we got to answer, because if you look at the second, if you get it in the first round, are you going to be eligible for the second? If they're automatically disqualified or ineligible for the second round, then yeah, they'd be put in a list that are ineligible to apply. But if they, for some reason, don't get the first round, they'd automatically be carried over to the next round.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, Cliff, when we spoke earlier today, that was kind of part of my question too, that if everyone that's kind of excluded because they're part of big chains, if everybody applied, does it look like we're likely to vastly exceed the 500 in the first round, or come under? And, you know, I really had no idea. So.
This is my understanding, and John could probably answer this better than me because him and Libby were working on this before I was. My understanding is the way the numbers were looked at in fees that were contributed by businesses were roughly 477,000 or something like that. So all businesses that paid into the pot, so to speak, that pull the money out for, say, round one wouldn't exceed 477. Is that?
Okay. No, that answers my question. Thanks.
George.
Okay, I got a couple things. I know we want to do this expeditiously and need to. I do think that the citizen comments, for the most part, raised very good questions that I would like to have answered. Not necessarily here and now, but I do think should be answered. Perhaps between now and final approval by the city council, and maybe EDRST goes ahead and votes, you know, and I can amend it, the motion to provide that the city council consider the citizen comments. I'm sure they would. I don't know, we need a motion for that, but I think it's important. Those are people that that know people and that know something about a lot of things, and that are asking good questions. I think this has already been mentioned, but obviously the draft that I saw had dates, and I think that dates will all have to be kind of relational to a decision, you know, to the governor or the St. Louis County executive or whatever, making a decision. And then you can say, well, within 2 months of that, within 3 months of that, whatever. Third point, I'm not, maybe I'm not understanding, but I don't see where the equity is achieved for small business relief by having a formula that takes into account how much they pay towards business licenses relative to everybody else. That was my understanding of the formula. If that is a formula that speaks to a cap and there is some merit consideration, I'm much more comfortable with that than if it simply is a formula, hey, you apply, and regardless of how much you really need, this is what you get. I think we're in circumstances where businesses and people find themselves in very different situations financially, and some of it is how much effort people make to get the leeway they need from some of their vendors and landlords and so on. It's a very unusual time. Like I said, I think, I know we have people who, when the first of the month comes around, they're freaking out because they can't pay their rent. Yet, I think we're not evicting people left and right under these circumstances. So I think, I'm not sure where I'm going with that, except that, and I know we have limited resources in the city government to pour over these applications and determine exactly what merit means. And I know if you give money to somebody but not to somebody else, and you don't have a formula for it, then you can be accused of favoritism and all that. But I'm not seeing where that formula by itself really meets my standards of fairness, which would be giving money to those businesses that need it the most.
Could we sort of, as an example, though it's not the best, because I realized one McKnight in the Gatesworth has more employees, so it didn't qualify for the PPP because it's over 500 employees. But a business like that likely doesn't need the money because everybody's still paying all of their bills to the Gatesworth, and everybody's still working, and it looks like a pretty well capitalized business, unless I'm wrong. I'm assuming that they don't qualify, but yet if you were talking about business licenses, I'm not sure if theirs is bigger or smaller than someone else's. Then you've got the garden business over at Old Bonham and Delmar, that unless I'm missing it, they really can't be open, and they're going to miss most of their year because this is the time when everybody would be buying plants. And so when you talk about the business license formula, I mean, John, this may be more to you than because you may have dived into this a little bit more. Sort of what is that cap? And the second thing I want to say is that I think I speak from, I don't know that I speak for council, but I think I have a pretty good read on it, particularly in the loop. I don't think we're too interested, and I think this program says that, we're not too interested in necessarily paying everybody's rent, because we're pretty certain that the landlords in the loop are doing okay. Not that they're great, and I mean that very respectfully, but the East End loop that everyone talked about when they got their $100,000 worth of funds, their $100,000 worth of funds primarily went to paying rent. And paying rent it sort of helps the business, but it really helps the landlord. And most of the landlords right now probably have a little bit more leeway as far as being able to withstand this probably than their tenants do. But I confused a couple of things. But John, can you, is there something that I'm missing here to parallel on what George was talking about, the equity of this formula?
Certainly. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, the LSBD proposal was to base the allocation on business license fees. That's different than the amount of retail sales tax generated by the individual businesses. So I'll give you an example. I won't identify the business, but one on the Olive Corridor, my understanding is this business paid approximately $28,000 in business license fees based on the formula is different than gross receipts. So but that business only contributed a few $100s in retail sales. So if you apply what you paid in from the EDRST standpoint, that is your percentage of retail sales, this business would get very little under this program. But if you looked at it based on the business license fee allocation, this business would get considerably more. So the principle that's being advanced at this point is based on the EDRST amount. So those businesses that are not retail establishments then would not qualify for any assistance under this particular program.
Okay.
I have a question. Was there any consideration given to putting a floor and a cap, like a minimum of, so somebody doesn't get a $213 check and somebody else doesn't get a $100,000 check? Was there any consideration, or did you analyze the
Yeah, I can address that. There was certainly some consideration that was given to it. The challenge that we had is trying to avoid a scenario where any business could say, we're subsidizing another business because you have capped us. We actually contributed more to the EDRST fund than this other business, but because you capped us, now we're subsidizing. So that was certainly, that's a policy decision, but that was the reason that we opted for whatever you have put into the EDRST, that's what you can get out.
Hey, this Byron Price. I guess my concern would be end up having 5 companies get 90% of the money, and then the smaller guy has to wait to the 3rd round, which don't exist.
I don't know if that actually, I mean, can that happen, consider the way that you're even just, with the way that it's set up? I don't think that can happen unless I'm confused, Cliff.
No, it definitely controls it. A redistribution basically of what you put in. So you're not going to get more than 100% of what you've contributed. So the money in, money out sort of thing.
I think that addresses what you're saying, Byron, that's not possible the way that they have it laid out.
But if I looked at what I put in, what we say, would the loop have put in more money than some other places?
It's probably going to actually be Olive with the businesses that have placed the most money into the EDRST.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at the memo, it talks about, and this was memo John and Libby worked on in the past, and ultimately we have crunched the numbers. If you look at Olive businesses, they actually, if I'm reading this right, contribute approximately 36.25% to the funds, and the Loop businesses only contribute roughly 17.9%. And then all other businesses do the remaining amount for a total of around 678,776. Is that correct, John? What you guys had put together?
Well, okay, so to the point about 90% going to a small number of businesses. So the way this is structured is, yes, there is that EDRST amount. In the memo, it states roughly $670,000. About 120 came from the Loop, and then about a little under 243 came from Olive. And then there was a bucket called the untraceables. That is, they were retail sales tax paid, for instance, for vehicle leases, and you apparently use taxes and others. And so when you pulled that bucket out, you had basically three buckets left: the Loop, Olive, and the rest of U City. Those 3 combined is about $477,000, as Cliff said. So under the proposal under consideration, there'd be 2 rounds. The first would be 500. So if everybody, all businesses were eligible for what they put in, you wouldn't exceed the 500. You'd be at 477. Now your take rate during that first round is going to be a lot less, because many businesses will not be eligible, it's believed, because they haven't been approved for PPP. So so the amount you'll actually use during that first round would, could be 100,000, it could be 200,000. And if you're potentially setting aside $1 million, then for round 2, you could roll that excess into the round 2. And so that would be actually much more than 500, or you can keep it at 500, which means the total payout under the program would be considerably less than $1 million. Your take rate on the second round, depending on the standards that are ultimately approved, will probably be higher than the first round. The purpose of the second round has been mentioned before is to make it equitable, to streamline it for the smaller businesses that perhaps haven't, that don't have the resources to pursue the PPP or program or otherwise not eligible. So this, as Cliff mentioned at the outset, you know, this draft is being put out there for discussion and refinement, and you know, for the board with its expertise to weigh in and make a recommendation.
I have a quick question, and I know you've already addressed this, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. If you're eligible for round one and you receive it, are you able to receive it in the second round?
The way I've drafted these two right now, no. If you look under the program guidelines in round two, it's one of the eligibility guidelines is you did not obtain funding in round one.
Okay, so there's not double dipping, essentially. It's going to be more.
Correct.
Okay. And if there are funds that are still left and we are within the timeline, are we potentially thinking of doing a round three if needed?
I can respond to that. Yes, if we at some point still have funding within that $1 million that's available, certainly the intention would be to recommend an additional round.
George, you had a question?
I mean, I just, okay, yeah, here's the question. How are we fitting this within the statute and the ordinance in terms of purposes to which these funds may be applied? And well, let's get that answer first.
Okay, yes. 12520 basically is a verbatim version of the compiled statutes of the state of Missouri. And it's really broken down into three things. Basically administrative type of cost, long-range infrastructure project cost, and then basically what I would call loans, operational costs, things like that. So this one is going to be fit under subsection C, and is comparable to the providing of grants and loans to companies for job training, equipment, acquisition, site development, and infrastructure associated with that business in the form of a loan. And I think Mr. Mulligan is comfortable with us putting it under that grouping because it really falls under the but shall not be limited to verbiage that's in there. So I think it's similar in nature to subsection C. So that's how we're fitting it under it. And that's really, if you take all the money for the 25% that you have for the administrative, say the 25% cap for administrative costs, the 20% minimum you have to earmark for long-term economic development projects. Roughly, you have about 55% of all EDRST funds that can be utilized for subsection C.
I understand making it a requirement to apply for federal and state funds that may be available as a way of incentivizing businesses to do that. And also, to some extent, it's kind of is a measure of merit. You know, do they want it badly enough to do that? But I think someone said that's maybe a pretty burdensome paperwork requirement for a small business that's not used to doing grant applications and the like. I'm concerned that the people that don't do that application may be the ones most in need, maybe very good small businesses in U City. And overall, I don't believe this board has ever considered something like this fairness idea of how much did you put in versus how much are you getting out. I don't recall ever hearing a comment to that effect. Maybe I missed it. Maybe the loop came in saying, hey, we provide all this money, and they exaggerated what it probably was, because we now see it was not even quite 20%. But I have a real problem with all of a sudden bringing this up that and setting a precedent for there being some kind of concept that equity means everybody is entitled to their portion of these funds. I mean, these funds are, they're really, I mean, they are and they're not being generated by these businesses. You know, they're being generated by consumers who walk in the door and pay sales tax buying something. Yes, they're buying it from that business. So, but it's not just theirs. And I'm very concerned that we have a system that's, we're talking about equity, but we're not doing it at all.
I just have a couple of actually comments with what you're saying, George, and then a couple questions. One comment is, I mean, as a sole proprietor myself, I've applied for both of the federal loans. I understand the process. It's not that hard. It's not that hard. I mean, you have to get some paperwork and things together, but if you need to get money, it's pretty simple to do, as well as filing for unemployment if you're a sole proprietor. So I feel like the businesses, I don't know what other way we could figure out a method to do this in a way that would be equitable in the time that we need to do it. And I think that we need to think about that all of the businesses will not file for this, unfortunately, whether they need it or not. And so to give it to them in a way that is proportionate to what they've put in, I think sounds like somewhat of a fair way to do it. And if we recognize that those things may not add up, I'd like some room for us to be able to discuss that before we have a second round. But I think as we go into the first round, that it seems like that's the best way to do it for now. But that's just my personal thought. And I know that I've actually done the paperwork for the PPP and the EIDL and for unemployment. And it is, if you file your taxes, you already have that paperwork anyway.
Well, that's very helpful to hear, Tracy, because that goes along with what I said, that requirement actually just kind of incentivizes people and directs them. Actually, if we do the good communication and outreach work that it sounds like we're planning on, that could perhaps, you know, direct people to these other sources of funds during this hard time. And Tracy, you know, that's good to hear that you know, you were able to do it. It was pretty straightforward, and that should be the case for everybody, sounds like.
I think the one thing that I would say, having done that, and I would hope that maybe we could figure out a way to do that with the city, is for people to have an option for questions. So that if there are any questions about filing and then anything that's missing, and to find about a timeline, that it's really, really clear about that. Because if there's one thing I can tell you about the federal programming right now, you have to call numbers and there's not enough people to answer the phones, and there's no, you know, nothing is being shown on a website. And so if you want to know what the process is, I think if we can give a very clear timeline of the process as far as when they would receive the funds, and if there's a question and answer, FAQ, or some way to contact the city. I know with limited, you know, personnel, it's kind of hard, but I think those are two things that I found from the process myself that would be really helpful for those people once they decide to apply.
Yeah, and some websites can post Q&A that applies to everybody without divulging, you know, private information or anything. So the question gets answered on the website for anybody that's got a question. I agree with Tracy, and I think that, yeah, we need to be very cautious here. You know, the group that can be the enemy of the good, and striving to do some sort of subjective dive down evaluation of merit is subjecting the whole thing to favoritism and, you know, who does somebody know? And, you know, I mean, this is very simple and objective. You know, it's tried to exclude the big players. So, you know, we're not sending checks, am I correct, to, you know, Schnucks and, you know, Aldi's. There are some, you know, big chains that are excluded from this. So, I mean, I think that, you know, there's still things I agree that we should be careful about those dates because none of us really know. But I trust that the city council and the staff are pragmatic people. And if we're locked down for another 5 weeks, well, then there's no way we're going to hit those dates. And everybody understand that. I don't lose sleep over that.
Brendan.
I think those are all good comments. I think the only thing I have to say, the 0.5% penalty, if you will, if they don't meet those requirements. And that's your guys' bullet points here. You know, obtaining the same staffing from February 15th.
Yes.
I mean, hypothetically, if a business, you know, had to limit staff or the amount of people that they could actually have physically show up, is there a way to modify that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if we're comfortable, you know, if the council's comfortable with it, that's definitely a guideline that can be adjusted to better.
Yeah, Brendan brings up a good point as someone else who has applied for PPP loans and has business that is shut down and not opening for the foreseeable future. It's you know, the goal though of PPP was to get people off of unemployment and back on payroll. The challenge has been many people are making more money on unemployment than they would on payroll, particularly if they were part-time. And so we have the simplicity of the PPP formula. And I think what someone has talked about with the length of time and then with the exact formula as far as bringing headcount back, those are good tweaks. I'm just not sure exactly the best way to tweak them, candidly. Because I think everyone who's operating under the current PPP programs are very nervous about the fact that they may not get all their folks back and spend the 75% on payroll, and then they have the 0.5%, the 1% penalty on a 2-year loan. These are the devils in the details here as far as how we make this work for everybody. So I appreciate those comments. And George, I also appreciate the comments that you made regarding equity and how we make sure this works, because we really don't. I think you bring up a good point that on a macro basis, we really don't like dividing this pie by you get out what you put in, because I think we all hopefully have a little bit better of an esprit de corps, if you will, where we're in this together and we all try to help each other out. I do know, by the way, just for all of your all's sake, I think there are a number, if not a vast majority of the city council that are watching this. So just so you guys know, I think your comments are being listened to by a much broader audience, which is good, because I think this is an important thing for us. So I know the council members will be interested in changing the dates and figuring out how we do something about the personnel, because I think that's clearly been an issue with the current federal program.
And this Byron Price, to piggyback on something Tracy had mentioned, if the city on their website could have like a checklist. So if Byron went in to apply, there's a checklist that I can step through, you know, to tell me you need this first, second, third, fourth, fifth, then apply. So then I know what documents or information I need to get right up front. And then my last statement is, I guess it's to Cross and the city manager. Say, for example, you get into this and you start allocating money. Is there some trigger to say, oops, this thing is way out of balance and it's not doing what we thought it was, to reset it, to get it back in balance? Because you don't really know until people start applying.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's going to be a learning curve for all of us. I don't know if there's a playbook for this. So we'll continue to monitor it and report. And then I think what we'll do is we'll leave it, as a staff, we'll look at it. And I guess to kind of put you on notice that we may have to bring this back for reconsideration through an emergency meeting or whatever it may be, and ultimately get it to mayor and council for an amendment to the program. But until we know, we don't know, you know, the specifics. But what I can promise you is we'll continue to monitor and report on it, on the status of it.
And I would just like to say that I would be happy to, you know, attend an emergency meeting if we need to come back and tweak anything. I have no problem with that, because I think once we put it out there, I mean, honestly, the federal government has done this so far. They put out things and then they realize that it's not working as well, and they keep on doing a new iteration of it. And I think that that's the same thing that's going to happen. And so as a, you know, as a member, I would, of the EDRST, I'd be happy to jump back in and kind of, you know, figure out if we need to tweak something.
I think we all would, sure.
Could we go back to the chair's original comment and see whether or not someone would like to make a general motion regarding the staff's proposal, understanding that there's probably going to be some details that need to be worked out by city council as well when they meet, but simply a motion to approve the proposal in its, you want to say this in a general form as presented by staff at this meeting?
Brandon, why don't you go at it?
I'll make a motion.
I'll second you.
Hold on, let me get this right. I'll make a motion to put forward the program as provided by staff, with the understanding that it could be tweaked at a later date. How's that?
I second that.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
George has a question.
I think George did you have a question, George?
I'm sorry.
Well, I read this quickly and maybe I misunderstood, but if the intent is to be small business, and I understand that, you know, a laborious process of examining the merit of each application on, you know, some way is not practical, but what about just a cap on the size of the business? Say, look, this is a small business program, revenues of under X a month or a year or whatever to get in the door. Or is that already in there and I didn't see?
Well, that might be an option if we look at round two, but in the first round, if it's qualified under the federal guidelines, then it's already set in one of the qualifications. I think small businesses can be up to 500 people, for example.
Right, okay, that program has a
Yeah.
limitation, right?
Yeah, yes.
That's a pretty large small business for you city attorney. How
That's
many
not
do
a
we
whole
have
lot
that
of
have
us.
500 employees? A handful, maybe.
Would be nice.
More would be nice.
Kathy, I think you're good to
Call the motion.
Vote, all right. All in favor?
I
Opposed? Abstained? Okay, the motion passes. And I apologize, I can't see you when you're raising your hands and stuff.
That's okay.
And thank you, Madam
the
Chairman.
world of Zoom is a mystery right now to most of us. We're learning it daily, right?
The next item we have is the consideration of the proposal from Fusion Media, and I will let Cliff or Mr. Rose speak to that for a moment before we consider it.
Sure. I can advise you that one of the things that we're trying to do because of, I think it's just been enhanced because of the COVID-19 situation that we find ourselves in, is to better market all of the businesses in University City. And so what this proposal does is it's a part of that puzzle. It's not the only part of it, but it would establish a website that all of our businesses would be listed on, where we can assist them with that marketing.
I have a question. I'm sure that this was probably put out RFP or something like that, but I looked up Fusion just to see kind of what their work looked like, and they don't have a website.
Yeah.
So I was a little concerned that they're doing a website and they don't have a website. So if you could just kind of like speak a little bit to kind of, and I understand because I know Jessica, so I know that this is her company, but I was just wondering if they did present some other work that they've done and things.
Yes, they have. Probably the most popular website is the one that the Loop uses currently. That's her organization's work, as well as there is a second one that is on the Loop as well. But they have a good background in the creation of websites. And so the model, at least that they had described for me, how they would shape this website, I think seems to fit well with what we're attempting to do here. But
Okay.
yes, they do have good experience with it.
I trust you all. I just wanted to know because when I wanted to look at their work and they didn't have a website, it was a little bit concerning to me.
Three Kings, that's the business that comes to mind, that she's also assisted with helping put together a website for them.
Okay.
I will say from my experience, I thought the fees were actually very reasonable. So I didn't have a question there. Is there any further questions of the city manager, Cliff, on this?
So are you comfortable with the $3,000 one, which basically is the cost for retail service and restaurant, as opposed to the 2,000? Which number?
I think 3,000 one, I mean, for web services as it is anyway, that's really, really low. So I would cover as many businesses as we could possibly do for, if it's an extra $1,000, then that's, you know.
Exactly. Okay, thank you.
You need a motion for that, Kathy?
Yes, we do. Yes, ma'am.
Move approval.
Okay.
Byron came in from the out. There we go.
I second whatever Byron just like moved for.
Byron moved approval of the proposal and Tracy seconded it. All in favor? Any further discussion? If not, all in favor?
That was 3,000.
Aye. Yes.
All right. Opposed? All right, the ayes have it. Okay. Next meeting date, I think, will be maybe sooner than we thought. We'll see.
I think it will be sooner, and I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We know this is a tough job, and you know, and I want to thank everybody who's listening, and please know we're as frustrated as you are that we can't all be in the same room and talk, and we're frustrated we have to do this, but it's important that we respond, and you know, thank you, Mayor, for pulling this
I'd like
together.
to say one more thing too, Kathy, which I think is while we have people maybe watching, that I know that speaking for all of us, we want to do everything possible for all of the businesses in University City that need the help. And so I think, you know, it's pretty clear that we're trying to do the best we can and back the city with as much as information as they know. And so there's no not wanting to involve the public in things. It's really, we need to hit the ground now.
And I think some of this kind of came up in the economic development assessment too, with we're kind of fractured and, you know, in terms of the business community. So I think there could be a lot of good that will come, and as well as the assessment. Look forward to hearing more about that. All right, if there's nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you all. I look forward to working with y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cliff.
Thank you.